Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, where we just surpassed 5,000 fighter profiles covering 20 different promotions from all over the world, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. We got direct links to past fights for all these fighters, so you know exactly what to expect when they step foot in the cage on the weekends. Whether you're utilizing it to just predict fights or analyze fights, breaking down fights, whether you're an analyst, a predictor, a handicapper, a coach, a fighter, we have everything you need in one space on the MMA Fight Archive, so it's very easy to navigate, very easy to go through, and very easily accessible. And you can try it out with a 7-day free trial. Check the link in the description below and find out why we have over 110 satisfied subscribers on this service and utilizing it on a daily basis. All right. This weekend, the UFC heads back to the pay-per-view method, and they have a featherweight matchup in the main event. The featherweight title is on the line as it is a vacant title now after Ilia Topuria has vacated it after defeating Alexander Volkanovski last year, defending it against Max Holloway in October, and he said his job is done at the 145-pound division, and he wants to set his sights on the 155-pound division so he doesn't have to cut as much weight anymore. Thus, the UFC has given Alexander Volkanovski the opportunity for an immediate title shot, I guess, after losing it against Topuria last year. And up against him is going to be the hot start, the scorching hot Diego Lopes, who has been running through competition after falling short in his short notice UFC debut against Movsar Evloev, putting together a solid winning streak and jumping on the radar of everybody. And now getting his title shot. Hopefully it culminates in a big spot for him if he's able to get that win over Alexander Volkanovski. And then in the co-main event, we got Paddy Pimblett going up against Michael Chandler. I believe it is a 5-round main event, or co-main event, I should say, which obviously we don't know if we usually need those in Michael Chandler fights, considering how entertaining and chaotic they normally are. Even though his last matchup against Charles do Bronx Oliveira went the full 5 rounds, it's not often you see him going to the scorecards. And yes, it is a 5-round co-main event. And the other big storyline coming into this card is obviously the UFC debut of former Bellator champion and legend, I guess you can call him, Patricio Pitbull, as he takes on Yair Rodriguez and hoping for a statement victory in his debut with the biggest mixed martial arts promotion in the world. All right, let's do a quick recap of our Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night plays from this past weekend's UFC card. The Lock of the Night continues to give me trouble this year. Absolutely horrendous run. I believe that's now 4 straight UFC Lock of the Night plays that have bit us in the ass. And this time around, it was Louis Gurul, who had a solid first round, grinding out O'Day Osborne, and it seemed like he was going to get to it again in the second round until he got clipped after getting countered, throwing a leg kick, and was put out. I thought they could have given Gurul a little bit more rope, but I completely understand the stoppage. So Gurul takes his first professional loss there. O'Day Osborne snaps a 3-fight losing streak. It was just a mess all around. So unfortunately, the Lock of the Night does not come through for us there. For the PFL, it comes through for us with Matsuyoki Kikuiri. Butchered it probably, but he comes through for us. But we did end up losing out on our Octagon Lock of the Night play, which was very surprising to me as well, as Aaron Abbey was not able to get the job done there. So that now drops our Lock of the Night record even further down to 12-15 on the year for a 44% hit rate. I don't get it. On the glass half full side of things, the Dog of the Night play has been doing fairly well this year. We went 2-1 over this past weekend on Dog of the Night plays. For the UFC, it was Reese McKee who was able to put an absolute beatdown on Daniel Frunza for the entirety of the first round, and ultimately having that fight stopped in between rounds due to a doctor's advice. And it made sense. You know, the lip of Frunza was absolutely scorched. He had the very bad welt on one of his eyes as well. Great work from McKee to finally get his hand raised for the first time with the UFC after a bunch of failed attempts, considering all the matchup studies he lost. So that one comes through for us. I believe our OKTAGON Dog of the Night play came through. I can't recall it off the top of my head. The PFL Dog of the Night did not come through, but again, 2-1 on the weekend. Now brings our record to 17-14 for Dog of the Night plays for the year for a 55% hit rate. Solid ROI. I think we're close to 30% ROI on Dog of the Night plays, so I'm happy about that. But it's just the lock of the night play that I really got to wind things together and build the confidence again and try to get back, to that profit zone that I've been in with the lock of the night play for the last couple of years. This year, not so hot. So we'll see if we can turn that around. Reminder, this weekend, not only is UFC 314 going down on Saturday, but we have LFA 206 and PFL 2 going down on the Friday. So I will have full card breakdowns for both of those events on the YouTube page. Obviously, they'll be written first on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. I'll have track plays there for those cards as well. But in terms of YouTube breakdowns, I will be breaking down both of those. The PFL one you guys could probably expect for on Wednesday. There are a lot of fight week changes for that first card. So just to avoid any more confusion, I'm probably going to push it to the day before weigh-in. So that will be Wednesday. And then for LFA, I'll drop that on Thursday as I normally wait for weigh-ins to complete for those LFA and Cage Warriors breakdowns. So stay tuned for all that good stuff. I believe that's a wrap on the intro for you guys there. So we got 13 fights to break down for this UFC 314 card. Obviously, top heavy with the featherweights there, but some fun fights sprinkled out for a card that's taking place down in Miami. It seems like their annual trip to go down there every April now for the UFC. They sell a lot of tickets, and it's a big market for them. And obviously, they usually showcase that by giving them a good chunk of fights. And I think the fans will be very happy with what they got for this card. So, let's get right into this bad boy. We start off in the women's bantamweight division where we have Nora Cornolle coming in at -170 going up against Haley Cowan, who comes in at +145. I'll start off on the Cornolle side of things, who had her 8-fight winning streak snapped by the woman that handed her first professional loss to her in her first professional fight, Jacqueline Cavalcante. Cavalcante is now 2-0 against Nora Cornolle, and like I said, those are the only 2 losses on Cornolle's record. She wasn't able to deal with, the technical striking of Cavalcante in the second and third rounds. We saw Cornolle have some success in that first, but really start to drop off after that. Normally, she showcases an aggressive Muay Thai striking style, walking her opponents down and being very aggressive. Something that I've been very impressed with her since her UFC debut is her improvements in the defensive grappling realm, because that's where she's shown a lot of flaws and holes earlier on in her career, but she's gotten to the point where she's able to stuff some takedowns or immediately reverse positions, work back to her feet, and then get back to that optically pleasing style of just moving forward and throwing big shots. And I think that's why one of the judges actually ended up scoring the Jacqueline Cavalcante fight in her favor. So she might not be efficient, but she's making it look good for the judges, and that often plays a big role. I believe Cavalcante fully deserved to win that fight, but again, it's the optics sometimes that make the difference. And Priscilla Cachoeira is a huge example of that, like specifically her fight against Ji Yoon Kim, where she was outstruck, I think almost by double significant strikes, but the fact that she continued to move forward and was or at least throwing big strikes and making it look like she was landing was enough for the judges to score that fight in her favor. And Cornolle kind of brings a similar aspect to the game with their Muay Thai approach. She's going up against Haley Cowan, who's been out of competition for over 2 years now, but she made her UFC debut last time around against Jamie Lynn Horth and showcased why she may not be that effective in the UFC. Now, she comes from a gymnastics background, so you can see it in her athleticism and some of her physicality when she looks to bully her opponents in the clinch, utilizing her strength to push them against the cage, get off on some dirty boxing and some knees, try to drag them to the ground and have success there. But we've seen plenty of fights where even when she gets that takedown, her ability to hold opponents down or utilize some technical things to be a little bit more efficient doesn't really come to fruition. We see opponents throwing up submissions and getting her to tap, or pulling off reversals and getting on top of her and landing some big damage from there. She's big, she's strong, she's physical, but I just don't think her mixed martial arts skills are catching up to the rest of her physical abilities. And at a certain point, that's going to start to bite her in the ass, especially at the UFC level. We saw it against Jamie Lynn Horth, and unfortunately for her, I think she feels it once again here against Cornolle. Now, Cornolle's nothing special either, but she does have some decent Muay Thai, which is an advantage over what Cowan brings to the table in the striking realm. Cowan might have some success in the clinch and the grappling, but I think we'll see the improvements of Cornolle really allow her to nullify the control time from Cowan, and then eventually start putting it on her with the striking and, again, making it look good optically by constantly moving forward and throwing big strikes. So I'm going to lean with Cornolle here, and I'm not a big fan of her, guys. You guys know I've been fading her for the last couple of fights. I may have nibbled on her a little bit in the Cavalcante fight because I thought the odds were just a little bit wide, but I think this is a very winnable fight for her as long as she can match the physicality of Cowan and show urgency in the clinch and the grappling round when Cowan tries to implement that style. All right, moving over to the middleweights now. We got Trishan Gore coming in at plus 270, going up against Marco Tulio, who comes in at minus 320. Now, starting off on the Trishan Gore side of things, he's on a 2-fight winning streak with both of those wins coming by submission, by guillotine. The last of which was a standing guillotine against Antonio Trocoli, who's probably one of the worst fighters that we've seen in the UFC in the last couple of years. But Gore, a guy that largely leaned on his power striking approach to walk opponents down and throw big shots. But since coming back from that loss to Cody Brundage, we're seeing him a little bit more active with trying to get fights into the grappling realm, taking opponents down immediately, or at least trying to, or if not, he would settle for the clinch and try to wear on them there until they showed their neck and he was able to jump on guillotines. He's still only 5-2, only 7 professional fights, 30 years old, and I think he's slowly settling into the type of fighter that he's going to be. He wants to get to the grappling realm. He wants to get that choke on so that he can try to submit his opponents. As he continues to take steps up in competition, we'll see how effective that could actually be against guys that will provide a little bit more resistance because let's face it, guillotines are one of the easier submissions to defend for a lot of the higher level guys, so we'll see how long he can get away with it. He's going up against Marco Tulio, who's on a very solid winning streak right now, but most importantly, picked up the biggest win of his career by knocking out Ihor Potieria back in January in his UFC debut. Tulio is a guy that trains out of the same camp as Charles do Bronx Oliveira, and although he may not show the submission threat that we normally know from the Oliveira side of things, he shows the thirst for violence the way that Oliveira fights. Likes to move forward, likes to throw big strikes, but I really admire his maturity and growth as a mixed martial artist over his last couple of fights where we've seen him try to implement a little bit more grappling into his game, not so much to try to go for submissions, but more so to try to, build a body of work should the fight hit the scorecards that the judges would actually score it in his favor. It's clear he has some big pop on his shots and throws with a lot of power, but striking defense-wise, he has submission issues in his game, which makes it kind of hard to really be confident in him as a minus 320 favorite. I get he has a huge experience advantage over Trishan Gore, probably more well-rounded, but you can't overlook the power that Gore throws with, and considering how many times we've seen Tulio get hit and put in trouble in some of these recent fights, things could get a little bit shaky for him. So maybe the under 1.5 at plus money may be the best way to go about this matchup. But, although Gore is all the way up at plus 270, it's not enough to sway me off the Tulio side in terms of a prediction. I'm going to go Tulio in this spot. I think his striking and then eventually his grappling will allow him to dictate the pace of this fight. And I think he eventually ends up countering Gore here, finding a big shot and putting him away by knockout. But minus 320, I would think twice about parlaying that too heavily throughout the card. All right, moving over to the flyweights now. We got Sumudaerji coming in at minus 185, going up against Mitch Raposo, who comes in at plus 160. Now, Sumudaerji had a solid 3-fight winning streak from 2019 to 2021. Unfortunately, he is now on a 3-fight losing streak, being finished in 2 of those matchups against Matt Schnell and Timothy Elliott by submission. And last time around, he almost got knocked out in the second round by Charles Johnson. Credit to him for rallying back in the third round and having a successful round there where all 3 judges scored it in his favor, but it was still not enough to undo the work that Charles Johnson had done through the first 2 rounds of that fight. Sumudaerji is normally a guy that likes to utilize his power striking approach to touch up opponents from distance and then snipe them with that big shot to try to put them away. It's obvious as the defensive grappling is where he finds the most issue, which is why guys like Machnell and Tim Elliott were able to submit him, although the fight with Machnell was very chaotic and could have gone either way considering how that fight went. But that's where fighters often look to take Sumudaerji if they want to try to get the better of him, is with the grappling. So I don't fault him for seeking out the help of Team Alpha Male over his last couple of fights to try to round out that aspect of his game, but I don't know if he's going to be able to get it to a level where he'll be able to get into that top 5, top 10 range of the flyweight division if he can't shore up the grappling enough. I just don't see it happening. And we're going to see it tested this weekend in a guy with Mitch Raposo, who ended up coming up short in his short notice UFC debut back against Andre Lima in June of last year. And that was a fight where Lima missed weight pretty badly as well. So, a lot of things working against Raposo that night. Raposo is a guy that was actually on the Ultimate Fighter 29 and ended up losing the first fight to Ludovic Sholinian. Raposo was the first overall selection. I forgot which team it was for, but he was the first fighter picked in the draft there. So, obviously, guys see potential in Raposo, but unfortunately he was unable to showcase it on the Ultimate Fighter. He was then given another opportunity on the Contender Series back in 2021 and ended up coming up short against the then undefeated Jake Hadley. He would go on to win his next 4 fights, finishing all of them as well, hence why he ended up getting the call to the UFC to fight Andre Lima. He comes from a wrestling background, and that's often the way he looks to approach and attack his opponents, mixing in his striking with level changes and trying to drag opponents to the ground. Against Andre Lima, it seemed like he was a little bit gun shy, and it seemed his offense was muzzled because of the power and the striking advantage that Lima held in that fight. But I think with that experience under his feet now, I think we'll see a much more confident version of Raposo. We see it time and time again where guys that come into the UFC on short notice end up losing that first fight, but then make a better account of themselves in the second matchup. And I think we're going to see that trend hold true here with Mitch Raposo. Look for Raposo to mix his striking perfectly here to eventually drag this fight to the ground. And I think it's going to be too much for Sumudaerji to deal with. And I think that'll actually lead to Raposo mustering up a finish. I'm leaning submission, but there's absolutely a possibility where he can get a dominant position and start raining down big shots to eventually get Sumudaerji out of there. But I do like Raposo in this spot. I like him as the underdog at plus 160. I'd put him closer to 50% to 55%. I think he has that big of a wrestling advantage that he, there's an argument that he could be the slight favorite here, given that advantage. So I'm going to go Raposo and Raposo by submission. All right, next up in the middleweight division, we got Cedric Dumas coming in at plus 170, going up against Michal Oleksiejczuk, who comes in at minus 200. Now, Cedric is coming off of a victory over Denis Tuliulian in a matchup where he utilized a lot of clinching and wearing Tuliulian down up against the cage and staying busy enough that the referee wasn't forced to step in all that often to break them apart. He easily won those first 2 rounds by keeping Tuliulian up against the cage, landing knees, landing some dirty boxing, breaking back out into space, utilizing his footwork and his mobility to touch him up from distance and eventually re-engage in the clinch and just really overpower him in that spot. In the 3rd round, it seemed like his cardio really started to fail him, but he kept moving enough that it kept him from getting 10-8'd or even finished by Tuliulian, hence why Dumas ended up winning that fight on the scorecards. I'm still questioning what Dumas' ceiling is. He's 29 years old, 10-2. His Contender Series victory over Mataj Peñas was very impressive to me because Peñas is a very solid prospect who's doing very good things over there in OKTAGON on the European scene. And Dumas was able to submit him in 47 seconds with a nasty choke. So when Dumas is on, he could be a solid threat. And he's going to have to try to pull it all out here to try to defeat Michal Oleksiejczuk, who's on a very rough run right now. 3-fight losing streak, 1-4 over his last 5 fights. Last time around, coming up short against Shara Magomedov. And that was a fight where I backed Oleksiejczuk as a plus 200 underdog because I expected his constant forward pressure to keep Magomedov in a uncomfortable position. But I was right about him constantly moving forward in that fight, it just didn't really come to fruition in terms of him landing with enough emphasis to outweigh the big shots that Magomedov was landing in return. Hence why Oleksiejczuk ended up losing that fight. There are some fight IQ issues with Oleksiejczuk's game that kind of makes him a little bit harder to trust. He's fun to watch in terms of constantly moving forward, throwing combinations, utilizing great body work as well with his boxing, and then eventually coming up with big shots to his head. But, there's a reason the majority of his losses have come by submission, because he has a lot of holes in his game on the grappling side of things. If guys are able to take him to the ground, they're going to get him into uncomfortable spots and then obviously give up a submission. And I think that Dumas could potentially do that here. I think Dumas, obviously with his 2-inch height advantage and 5-inch reach advantage, will allow him to stay safe at distance, constantly moving laterally, utilizing a lot of kicks to keep Oleksiejczuk at bay and kind of thwart that constant forward pressure. And then I think it's just a matter of time before he wraps him up in a clinch. And I think he'll be successful with taking him to the ground. And I think we'll see Oleksiejczuk actually make a mistake when he's trying to work back to his feet, leaving his neck open for Dumas to snatch up and potentially getting that submission victory as well. So I was kind of surprised that the line is as wide as it is. It might come closer to fight time, but Oleksiejczuk is hard to trust at -200, especially when he's at a grappling deficiency or a grappling disadvantage, just like he is in this matchup. Like, Dumas is not this crazy submission specialist, but he has the tools to cause Oleksiejczuk frustration and make a mistake that he could capitalize on, just as we saw Kevin Holland do and Michel Pereira do. Dumas might be able to do something like that as well. So look for Dumas to make this hard, grueling fight in close quarters, or be very elusive in distance until he can eventually get to his grappling and find that submission. So I'm going to go Dumas by submission, and +170 I think is a decent enough line to take a shot there. All right, featherweights up next here, as we have Darren Elkins coming in at +310, going up against Juicy J, Julian Erosa, who comes in at -375. Now, starting off on the Elkins side of things, at 40 years old, he'll be 41 next month. He's on a 2-fight winning streak. That includes that submission victory over TJ Brown, where he dominated him for about 2.5 rounds until that submission opportunity opened itself. And then last time around, dominating Daniel Pineda after a slow first round, absolutely busted up Pineda. And I believe Pineda ended up retiring after that matchup as well. Elkins is an all-gas grinder. His durability has largely allowed him to survive a lot of these bad spots and fights and then come back late, putting guys to the grinder, drowning them in deep water, and either finishing them, submitting them, or mustering up enough work in the final 2 rounds to end up winning fights on the scorecards. It's so hard to always count him out, because if his durability shows up, he's going to make it an absolute nightmare for his opponents whenever they're sharing the cage with him. He wants to constantly wrestle. He wants to constantly scramble and cause you to be on the defensive for the most part. I would like to see him land a little bit more damage when he does get some of these dominant positions, but he's so good at, just wearing opponents down and wearing them out, which is constant activity and constant output, with mainly his grappling style, that it just breaks opponents down, and that allows him to start doing what he wants deeper in deep water. Now, he's going up against Julian Erosa, who's, I don't want to call it a career resurgence per se. It's only a 2-fight winning streak that he's on. But he's coming off of back-to-back first-round submission victories over Ricardo Ramos and then last time around against Christian Rodriguez. Erosa, long, lanky, 74-inch reach, obviously. Likes that front choke series, loves the dart stroke, loves the guillotine, hence why he tries to attack it as often as he can. And then on the feet, he has like a hands-down unorthodox striking style, where he tries to just chip away at opponents from distance and just make it a living hell for them, which then usually draws out desperation takedown attempts, and that's where he's usually able to slap on that front choke that he has. But there have been fights in the past where he's been grinded out. Guys have successfully utilized a wrestling game to keep him on his back and just outwork him essentially. But the other aspect of his game that's kind of been a little bit questionable is his durability. 6 of his last 7 losses have come by knockout, and they don't look that great, especially when he gets knocked out. He's getting a lot of miles on his body. I don't know how much more punishment he can take. Luckily, he's not facing a guy in Darren Elkins who's known to be a big one-hitter quitter kind of guy, but Elkins is pretty good with putting a grind on somebody, and he could absolutely do that to Erosa here. Erosa might want to, or will probably try to attack that guillotine, try to take advantage of some of these wrestling attempts from Elkins. But Elkins, he's a very tough guy to submit. He's only been submitted once in his career, and that came against Charles do Bronx Oliveira 15 years ago. This is a guy that often finds himself in chokes, but he just constantly moves and he constantly works so he doesn't get trapped, and he eventually finds a minute to breathe or a second to breathe and then work out of those submission opportunities, just as we saw when he fought Daniel Pineda last time around. So if Erosa thinks he's going to front choke Elkins, I think he has another thing coming there. The reason I'm ultimately still going to lean with the Erosa side is I think he's going to be a little bit more hellbent on landing damage. And I think that's going to be the ultimate difference maker once this fight hits the scorecards, which the over 2.5 probably would be my favorite spot in this matchup. But should he not? Should Elkins be able to muster up enough damage when he's able to get some of these more dominant positions? This could be much closer than minus 375 indicates on Julian Erosa. So I'd think twice about taking Erosa in the spot. I get the submission wins of Ahamos and Rodriguez look great, but you're talking about fighting a guy that is nearly unsubmittable in Darren Elkins. And Erosa might get him this time. But going off of tape and going off of everything I've seen, Elkins normally showcases good submission defense and does a great job in terms of working out of those bad spots. So yeah, I wouldn't hate anybody that wants to take a little bit of a sprinkle on Elkins, hoping that his durability holds up and hoping that he continues to showcase the submission defense that we've seen from him in the past. But in terms of an official prediction, I'm going to go Erosa. Erosa by decision. I think he lands more damage, and that ends up being the difference maker. But just be very wary how this fight's going to go down. All right, lightweights going at it here, as we have Jim Miller coming in at plus 550, going up against Chase Hooper, who comes in at minus 750. Now, starting off on the Jim Miller side of things, last time around, he won via guillotine against Damon Jackson. It was pretty competitive for the first 2 or so minutes, and then eventually Damon Jackson shot a desperation takedown that Jim Miller saw coming from a mile away and immediately slapped on that guillotine and forced Damon Jackson to tap out. Now, Jim Miller is a guy that holds a plethora of records in the UFC. I'll quickly list them off for you guys here in terms of he has the most UFC appearances with 45, most UFC wins at 27, and then he also finds himself littered throughout other categories as well. Second for most UFC finishes at 19. Second for most UFC submissions at 13. Most fight of the night bonuses tied for fourth with 15. Most fight time, fourth place for that, for 7 hours, 14 minutes, and 28 seconds. And through it all, he's put together a 27-17 record with the UFC since joining them back in 2008. This guy is a veteran's veteran. Right? This guy is somebody that goes out there and has managed to avoid long losing streaks, which ultimately keep him in the UFC. Like even right now, he's 3-2 over his last 5 fights, turning away, veterans and turning away guys that are looking to break into the rankings. But it's obvious he's not going to get to a point where he's challenging for a title, right? He's 41 years old, for God's sakes. BJJ black belt, as we obviously know, as I talked about, as many submissions as he has. The only guy that has more more finishes and submissions than him, Charles Oliveira, by like 1 or 2, right? I think Charles Oliveira has 20 UFC finishes. He has 19. Charles Oliveira has, he has way more submissions, I guess. But regardless, still, Jim Miller is up there in terms of one of the better guys on the roster. Throws big hooks, decent power, likes that pesky calf kick that he likes to just keep active with. If he's unable to dictate the pace of fights, that's where he ends up falling behind. That's where guys are able to take advantage of him and then really start to wear him down later on in matchups. But he's a tough SOB. Underrated power, obviously a very nasty submission game as well. Somebody that's going to be a tough out, maybe for the next year or two, maybe until he's 43, 44 years old. Who knows? It all depends how the UFC matches him moving forward. Now he's going up against a young 25-year-old Chase Hooper who's on a 4-fight winning streak, finishing the last 3 of those wins as well. He's known for his BJJ as well. High-level BJJ stuff, very good scrambler, very unorthodox submission attempts he likes to throw out there, great transitions, great scrambling ability. And I like the fact that he knows, like, there was a time where he was really working on his striking, that he was trying to get it up to the level, or at least close to the level of his submission. But I think he's kind of ditched that and just realized, like, let's just be a little bit more chaotic on the feet. That's the best way to level the playing field against guys that are going to have a striking advantage against him, so that he can utilize that chaos to get into the grappling realm to try to get to a submission game. That's exactly what he did against Vyacheslav Borshev. And even though that there is some controversy surrounding the finish in that matchup, the way that he constantly kept getting to a submission game, constantly causing Borshev some issues and frustrating him, it was impressive. It was very impressive from what we saw from Hooper that night. Now, can he do it against Jim Miller? It's possible. He has a 16-year youth advantage. And then on the flip side, obviously, you got Jim Miller with a ton of more experience in facing the who's who of the UFC over the last 17 years. I think Hooper wins. I think he is closer to his prime. I think he's able to get some of these positions where he can get off on some damage and cause Miller some issues. But you cannot count Miller out, especially at plus 550. That line is absolutely absurd. You're talking about a guy with as much experience as Jim Miller, with a good enough jiu-jitsu game that he could probably hang with Hooper in some of these spots. Maybe he's able to catch Hooper in a guillotine if Hooper gets a little bit too wild at times. I think Hooper wins. I think this ends up being a bit of a scramble fest, but I think it's ultimately going to be Hooper who ends up getting more dominant positions, landing some big elbows as well, probably cutting up Jim Miller, and I think he wins, but I would not put him at minus 750. Similar to what I was saying about Darren Elkins in just the previous fight, there is possibly some value on the veteran here to pull off the upset. There is some possible value that he might be able to sneak in a submission or something, or even land a big shot, maybe cripple the lead leg of Hooper by landing that calf kick. It's possible. It's hard to overlook somebody with such a vast experience advantage and is good at what the other guy is good at too. So it's going to be the age and the youth of Hooper that likely gets him this victory, but do not count out Jim fucking Miller. All right, let's move on to the women's strawweight matchup here with former title challenger Yan Xiaonan coming in at plus 125, going up against Virna Jandiroba, who comes in at minus 150. Now, starting off on the Xiaonan side of things, she is coming off a dominant victory over Tabitha Ricci back in November, where she stuffed the majority of her takedowns. I believe she stuffed 2 of the 3 takedowns from Ricci and then pummeled her on the feet, outstriking her 78-15. There was nothing Tabitha could do. She wasn't physical enough to establish top position when she was able to land that single takedown. Her striking obviously not up to snuff against Yan Xiaonan. And it's crazy. The amount of striking ability we've seen from Yan and the ferocity in which she lands her strikes, it's crazy that she doesn't have more UFC finishes on her record. The one she has over Jessica Andrade is the one that highlights the most, but she's landed big shots on other fighters, but she just can't put them away. But it's clear that she is landing the more significant damage when she's going up against these other strikers. The part of her game that she has improved significantly since joining the UFC is her defensive grappling. Obviously, similar to Sumudaerji, her fellow country folk. They joined up Team Alpha Male, and obviously those guys are helping her out. And we saw those improvements when she fought Mackenzie Dern. She often found herself in some compromising positions, but she stayed safe, and then she eventually got back to her feet and landed enough damage to end up winning that fight on the scorecards as well. But then we see fighters like Weili Zhang who have good enough wrestling and good enough control. They're able to keep Yan Xiaonan on her back, and that ultimately is what causes Yan the most problems. But striking, that's the MO for Yan Xiaonan. She throws nasty combinations with crazy ferocity. Now, she's going up against Virna Jandiroba, who's one of the slicker BJJ specialists that we've seen in the UFC. I think her last matchup against Amanda Lemos was a perfect example of seeing how she can get some scrambles going, creating opportunities for herself, and then eventually finding submission spots and coming through with them. We also can see in her fights with Lupita Godinez, who on paper was likely the better wrestler, but Jandiroba still found a way to get that fight into the grappling realm and control Godinez in those bad spots. Marina Rodriguez, she had very poor defensive grappling, but she was a much superior striker, and Jandiroba was able to get that into the grappling realm. She's 36 years old, one of the higher level fighters on the UFC strawweight roster, 21-3 record, very wizard-like with her grappling. And I think the Amanda Kibosh fights and the Mackenzie Dern fights kind of made her learn this lesson that she really needs to get to the grappling sooner than later. Otherwise, she's just going to get pieced up on the feet. Now, obviously, this fight will go one of two ways. Either Yan Xiaonan keeps his fight on the feet and batters Jandiroba in the striking realm, or Jandiroba gets a hold of Yan Xiaonan and she can get those dominant positions and keep Xiaonan there. And I'm going to have to lean with the latter here. I think Verna will get to her grappling effectively. It might not be your traditional takedown. It might be a trip. It might be a throw. It might be just jumping on the back of Yan Xiaonan. But I think Jandiroba will get those positions. And I think that she'll end up grinding out Yan Xiaonan over the course of 15 minutes. I think minus 150 is a fair line here. I'd even take Jandiroba up to minus 185. Again, I believe in her ability to engage in the grappling and be successful with it. Whether it comes through with the submission, I'm not sure, but I think we see her end up grinding this matchup out, getting the control time, landing the damage, and keeping Yan Xiaonan uncomfortable for the majority of this fight. So give me Jandiroba by decision. All right, next up, featherweights going at it here as we have Dan Ige coming in at plus 145, going up against the sneaky Sean Woodson, who's coming in at minus 170. Now, we'll start off on the veteran side of things here with Dan Ige, who is now 2-3 over his last 5 fights, currently riding a 2-fight losing streak, the last of which came to recent main event winner Lerone Murphy. And that was a fight where we saw Dan Ige have more success than people were expecting him to have. I believe he had a decent first round, but then the following 2 rounds he ended up coming up short. He did have glimpses of success in those rounds, but Murphy had the urgency to get out of these bad spots and then caused Ige trouble there from landing damage and getting some control time of his own. The previous fight to that, the Diego Lopes fight, that's the fight that probably cemented the fact that Dan Ige will never get cut from the UFC. If you remember, that was UFC 303, where Dan Ige stepped in on 6 hours notice. Yes, you heard that. You're right. It's an unprecedented, unheard of. Dan Ige ended up weighing in backstage as the event was going on, and he stepped in to fight Diego Lopes after Brian Ortega fell ill on fight day. And Dan Ige gave Diego Lopes everything he could handle. He dropped the first 2 rounds, but he was able to rally back in the 3rd round and nearly got a finish there. But unfortunately, it was too little too late by that point, and we saw Diego Lopes win that fight on the scorecards. What Dan Ige is best at, in my opinion, is utilizing his pressure boxing approach by putting combinations together and backing opponents up while landing big strikes. Where he comes up short are against specialists, against guys that can either completely out-grapple him and keep him on the defensive, or utilize solid striking and combinations to really keep him on the end of their punches and keeping their range and distance from him. He has great experience, great veteran as well, an ironclad chin for the most part, but it seems like when he finds himself behind at times, he ends up almost giving up on himself and allowing other guys to really control how fights are going and start dictating the pace. Now, he's going to have a lot to battle through here with Sean Woodson, who will be holding, a 7-inch height advantage, as well as a 7-inch reach advantage. Sean Woodson at 145 pounds is one of the ganglier guys at the division, and he utilizes it perfectly considering he comes from a boxing background. Now, apparently he got into a very bad car accident before he started his mixed martial arts career, and that derailed his boxing hopes. But he's made a pretty good account of himself as a mixed martial artist, putting together a 13-1-1 record since turning pro. Right now, he's on a 7-fight unbeaten streak with that one, weird fight against Luis Saldana that went to a draw. But since that fight, 4-fight winning streak after that, and most recently coming off of a nasty knockout victory over Fernando Padilla. Woodson, one of the more disciplined and better strikers that we have on the featherweight roster, and his ability to just manage range and distance with his straight shots down the pipe, but also that pesky like front kick that he has to just keep opponents at bay. I think I will see him successful with keeping Ige at bay here, landing his 1-2s down the pipe, utilizing his volume, busting up the nose of Dan Ige, and really frustrating Ige. For Ige, I think he needs to lean on his BJJ black belt. This is a guy that doesn't often utilize it offensively, but considering how he matches up with Woodson stylistically in this matchup, that would be his best approach. But I don't think he's going to get off on it enough, and ultimately it'll be the accumulative damage from Woodson that earns Woodson the decision victory here. So this is the breakout performance or the breakout fight that I think Woodson was looking for to finally get some respect in the UFC. He's 7-1-1 with the promotion since 2019. So I think it's time that we finally start giving this guy some flowers, especially if he's able to defeat a guy as tough as Dan Ige. All right, light heavyweights going at it next now as we have Nikita Krylov looking to build upon his 3-fight winning streak, coming in as a -205 favorite, going up against Dominic Reyes, who is finally getting some momentum going on a 2-fight winning streak and currently comes in at +175. Now, Nikita Krylov was a guy in his first 32 pro fights never saw the scorecards, and that was a perfect example of how he would fight. He would just constantly go out there and put opponents through the ringer, utilizing aggression, sometimes to a fault, and ultimately getting finished himself. But he was a guy that was very reckless with his striking approach, crashing the pocket consistently and throwing big shots on his opponents or looking for club and sub opportunities. He has now gone to a decision in 4 of his last 7 fights, showing the growth and maturity in his game, especially with how he looks to approach fights now. He looks to get opponents to the ground and grind them out with his smothering grappling approach or open up submission opportunities like we saw him do against Ryan Spann. He's on a 3-fight winning streak, like I said, and I think his performance against Volkan Oezdemir was one of the more impressive ones we've seen because Oezdemir is a guy that normally showcases decent enough takedown defense, and he got completely muzzled that night as Krylov put on a pace and pressure that Oezdemir was unable to keep up with. It's kind of weird that Krylov has been out of the cage for as long as he has. He's 32 years old still, so plenty of time to make some noise in this light heavyweight division. He was scheduled to fight Azamat Mirzakhanov back in November, but Mirzakhanov did pull out of that matchup. Now he's going up against Dominic Reyes, who had a very unfortunate 4-fight losing streak in which he was finished in 3 of them pretty brutally in some spots as well, most notably against Yuri Prochazka. But now he's come back in 2024 and won back-to-back matchups. He finished both guys, Dustin Jacoby, after countering him, after Jacoby got a little bit too reckless after having Reyes on the ropes, and then absolutely beat the piss out of Anthony Smith and forced a mercy stoppage near the ending of that second round. Now we know what Reyes is best at. He's a pretty good technical striker, utilizing good 1-2s down the pipe, nasty head kick as well, as Ovin St. Preux would attest to. And he's decent in the overall scheme of things with like mixed martial arts. The question for me is he really over the durability issues that we've seen plague his career? Because if he's not, then there are guys that at any point can uncork that big shot and put him away completely. This is going to be the test for him. In my opinion, this will be the test to see if he can get back into the top 5 and if he might find himself fighting for a title again before he hangs up the gloves. He's 35 years old, so that's something to keep in mind. He turned 35 back in December, but if he can stay active, this is a pretty quick turnaround if you think about it. I think that he could build that momentum to potentially get a title shot if he can continue coming through with some of these highlight reel knockouts. More so the Dustin Jacoby one than the Anthony Smith one. Now, how he matches up with Krylov, I think we'll see Reyes struggle a little bit. I think we'll see Krylov keep that pace and pressure on him. I think we'll see Krylov throw some big strikes to try to mask the takedown entries. I think he'll be able to land a few takedowns. I don't think he'll get a whole lot of control time, but that constant forward movement, constant pressure of Reyes could potentially lead to even Krylov landing a big shot to knock him out too. That's absolutely possible. On the flip side, Reyes could absolutely counter that aggression of Krylov, landing his counters, landing his straight shots, and that could potentially knock out Krylov as well. I don't want anything to do with this fight at the minus 200 right now on Krylov. I think this fight will likely end up hitting the scorecards. I think it's going to mainly look like Krylov dictating the pace, landing some shots, mixing in the clinch, getting some takedowns, and I think he's gonna win this by decision. But I don't want to completely overlook Reyes here either. Like, he might be getting his confidence back, and we might start seeing the shades of the potential we saw from him back in 2020. It's possible. But I gotta lean with Krylov here, as I think he has a little bit more tools to get the job done, just not at a minus 200 clip. So give me Krylov and Krylov by decision. All right, next up, featherweights going out of here. We got 3 featherweights here featherweight matchups out of the 4 to close out this pay-per-view card. The first of which is going to be between Yair Rodriguez, who comes in at minus 190, going up against Patricio Pitbull, who comes in at plus 165. Now, Rodriguez is riding a 2-fight losing streak, the first of which was a loss in a title unification bout against Alexander Volkanovski back in July of 2023. And that was followed up by a submission loss to Brian Ortega last year. Now, that loss against Brian Ortega is a little bit hard for him to swallow, considering how close he was to finishing Ortega in the first round of that matchup. And I don't know if he emptied the tank a little bit too early there, but we saw him really start to give up positions in the second round to Ortega, eventually leading to that third round submission for Ortega. Rodriguez, normally a flashy striker that likes to throw a lot of spinning stuff and flying stuff, has a solid sting and power to his shots as well, which have led to some knockout victories that we've seen in the past. His BJJ game off of his back is getting a little bit better, a little bit more active. But if he can shut down the first few submission attempts coming your way, it seems like he almost breaks mentally and kind of allows opponents to just dictate the pace from there. Again, on the feet, very solid, very good shots down the pipe, have some good speed, good power on it as well, good footwork. And again, his unorthodox nature with his striking usually allows him to land some shots that guys are not expecting, or guys are not just expecting to hit them from certain angles. And he's 32 years old now. Curious to see how he will be looking to introduce Patricio Pitbull to the UFC. This is a great matchup to see where Pitbull is at, especially considering he's 37 years old, right? He's coming into the UFC kind of getting the Michael Chandler treatment, who was faced off against Dan Hooker in his first UFC fight. Pitbull, Bellator legend, won the featherweight title. That's where he spent the majority of his career. Won the lightweight title. He ended up vacating it, so his brother had the opportunity to fight for it. He did try going down to bantamweight and challenge Sergio Pettis to try to become the first triple champ in a major MMA organization. Unfortunately, Sergio Pettis was able to get the better of him that night. That led to Pitbull actually taking on a very short notice matchup for Risen, facing a relatively unknown Chihiro Suzuki, and Suzuki was able to knock him out in the first round. So not a good run for Pitbull against Pettis and Suzuki, but he did manage to come back against Jeremy Kennedy in a matchup that I thought Kennedy was winning the majority of until Kennedy got hit with the big shot and eventually put away. Pitbull obviously has big power in his shots. He normally stalks his opponent with his Muay Thai approach, loves to attack the lead leg of his opponents and really walk them down. The issues I've kind of said that he's had in the past was that he was a little bit low volume at times, and that's actually why I bet Sergio Pettis against him when he tried to go down to 135 pounds, and that's why, I think Jeremy Kennedy was actually the slight favorite going into that matchup against Pitbull. But again, Pitbull's power did manage to bail him out of that matchup. Now, here against Rodriguez, I think we'll see Pitbull struggle. I think he's going to be at a 5-inch height disadvantage, a 6-inch reach disadvantage. His speed and power might be able to make up for that. But I think that we'll see the speed of Rodriguez actually counter Pitbull down the pipe. And I think that'll keep Pitbull from landing big enough shots to really change the tide of this fight. Maybe we'll see Pitbull try to slow Rodriguez down by throwing some big kicks to try to, batter the wheels, deflate the wheels a bit, deflate the tires, as some coaches like to say. But I think we'll see Rodriguez really get the better of Pitbull by landing more damage. And I actually am going to lean with him winning this fight by knockout. Now, the under 2.5 sits around plus 185 from what I saw last time around. And I think there's some solid value in that line. Considering how these guys fight and considering how they match up, I'm expecting this to be a stand-up war for the most part. From there, I'm expecting one of these guys to land a big enough shot to put the other one away. And I'm leaning more so that it's going to be Rodriguez because of the striking or the diversity of striking tools that he has compared to what we normally see from Pitbull. Not to mention Pitbull obviously being 37 years old as well. Going into researching this matchup, I really was expecting to take the plus money on Pitbull, but I just can't get there as I think Rodriguez is too good of a striker to get, lulled into the style that Pitbull normally brings. And I think that will ultimately result in Rodriguez winning this fight by knockout. But I'm going to be looking to target that under 2.5 at solid plus money. All right, featherweights going up next here, as we have Bryce Mitchell coming in at plus 220, going up against everybody's new favorite fighter, Gene Silva, who comes in at minus 260. Now, Bryce Mitchell obviously stirred in controversy throughout the last year or so with the whole Hitler thing that he was talking about and some of his views, political views, all of that stuff. And that has, made him a guy that a lot of people want to watch, whether it's to see him get knocked out like Josh Emmett did or see him actually win and try to continue to spread this message that he's trying to spread. Last time around, we saw him absolutely just dummy Kron Gracie till eventually ground and pounding him in the third round of that fight. But we know what Mitchell brings to the table. He wants to drag guys to the ground and utilizes BJJ approach to either smother them from that top position or look for submission opportunities as well. In the striking realm, does not bring much to the table. He's a guy that often we see desperation takedown attempts from him because he does not feel that confident or comfortable in the striking realm. And unfortunately for him, he's fighting a guy that's very comfortable in the striking realm here, and Gene Silva, who is, since joining the UFC back in 2023, won 4 straight fights now. This will be his 5th fight in 15 months. And he's knocked out all of his UFC competition thus far. What he did to Charles Jourdain was absolutely crazy. Battered Drew Dober for 2.5 rounds before a bad cut was forced to stop that matchup. Made Mausik Baghdasaryan not look like a dangerous striker and then knocking him out at the ending of that first round. Absolutely crazy what this guy's been able to do. A lot of people kind of overlooking the skill set that he brings, thinking that he's just a guy that's waiting to be exposed by a grappler. And a lot of people are liking the underdog value that you can be getting on Bryce Mitchell in this spot. And I even saw something on social media recently where people were putting together a little bit of a compilation of the 3 takedowns that Charles Jourdain landed against Gene Silva. Sure, he landed 3 takedowns. He only accrued 1 minute and 17 seconds of control time, which all was him just trying to hold Silva down as Silva was getting up. And I think that's the issue that Mitchell is going to have in this fight. He might be able to land some takedowns, but Gene Silva is just like a little ball of energy. He's very explosive, and I think he'll be able to quickly work out of these spots and then get back to the striking realm where there is a significant advantage for him against Bryce Mitchell here. He's much faster on the feet, has way more power as well. And I think it's just a matter of time before he lands that big shot and puts Mitchell away. So sure, there is an argument that Mitchell's grappling style is more minute friendly and, a better minute winning style. And I have kind of harped on Gene Silva in the past for being a little bit low volume at times as well. But he makes the most of the shots when he's throwing them. And we've seen him a little bit too buddy in a lot of his fights recently where he's like, high-fiving his opponent after every combination that he throws. But it's, he called Bryce Mitchell out after his last win. He clearly has some hate towards Bryce Mitchell, and I don't see him in being buddy-buddy with Mitchell at all. And I think we'll see him go for the kill for the most part, and I think we'll see him come through with it. Mitchell might have a little bit of success, and I think that's why we're seeing the Gene Silva line go from minus 325, which I believe that was the line on Saturday. Now it's early Saturday. Now it's, Sunday midnight. We're seeing him down to minus 260. So I think we're going to continue to see some action come in on Bryce Mitchell that will give us a better line on Gene Silva in the next few days. But I'm going to go with Silva. I think he gets the knockout, and I think he's going to be much harder to hold down than people are expecting him to be. So, again, experience advantage obviously in Mitchell's favor and all that, but Silva's physicality, athleticism, and explosivity, I think is just going to be too much for Mitchell to handle, and I think that'll ultimately lead to Silva landing that big shot and knocking Bryce Mitchell out. All right, co-main event time. We got 5 rounds to decide this matchup in the lightweight division, as we have Michael Chandler coming in at plus 145, going up against Paddy Pimblett, who comes in at minus 170. Now, starting off on the Chandler side of things, who's on a very tough skid as of late, 1-4 in his last fights, 2-4 in his 6 UFC fights, but he has earned a performance of the night or a bonus of the night in 5 of those 6 matchups. Just goes to show that the UFC is just banking on him to provide entertaining fights no matter who he goes up against. We know what he brings to the table, right? Explosivity, power, throwing big shots. He has some wrestling if he needs it, but I'm not overly impressed with his ability to control opponents. I'm certain, I have to double check it, but I do think he got that fight against Tony Ferguson that he won last, where he got that beautiful front kick knockout. I think he actually lost that first round on the scorecards to Tony Ferguson. So, things have really not been going all that great for Chandler, but he's more than happy to go out there and just have these spectacular performances, even in defeat. 38 years old. It's clearly he's just trying to make a buck at this point in time. He's not going to challenge for a title again anytime soon. That's just something that we have to kind of settle for. And I think, credit to Paddy Pimblett, picking and choosing his way through the UFC so far, has managed to position himself to fight a guy like Chandler, which is a very winnable matchup for Paddy Pimblett. Now, as much as I wanted to fade Paddy Pimblett going into this matchup because he's going up against a tough guy like Michael Chandler, this is a very winnable fight for Paddy Pimblett. This is a fight where he can get to his BJJ and grappling game and kind of nullify Chandler in these spots. As a straight-up wrestler, sure, Chandler might be the better wrestler, but Pimblett is a big lightweight. There's a reason he gets as big as he does between fights, and there's a reason he takes off as much time as he does between fights, because he takes his time to get back down to weight to a point that he can make that 5-pound weight limit. But then when you see him step foot against the cage against some of these guys, you're like, man, this guy's massive. He's huge. He's strong. And he's been using that to his advantage in a lot of fights now. So, Chandler might be able to land a big shot that might hurt Pimblett, but largely the guys that have had success against Pimblett in the past, Soren Bach, Nad Narimani, even Cameron Else from way back in the day, but more so the last 2 ones that I said, or the first 2 ones that I said, they were guys that were able to out-wrestle Pimblett and stay away from his dangerous BJJ game. Chandler has the wrestling advantage, but not to the point that I think he's going to be able to keep Pimblett on his back. I think it's just a matter of time before Pimblett gets those positions he needs to control Chandler, keep him on his back, wear him down, threaten with a few submissions, but I ultimately think Pimblett grinds him out and wins this fight on the scorecards. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be boring, if I'm going to be honest. I think Chandler's going to try to make it exciting, but I think it's going to be Pimblett that gets those positions that he needs, and he grinds this fight out. With that said, very low confidence. I've questioned Pimblett's ceiling ever since he joined the UFC. And I still feel as though, this is not a guy that's going to win the title. He might be able to challenge for a title. If he gets a win here against Chandler, he might freaking persuade the UFC to give him a title shot. But I still have my reservations about him. I fully can't get over the hump with him here, but I am ultimately going to predict him to win this matchup, and I think he wins it on the scorecards. All right, that brings us to our featherweight championship main event. Again, there is no champion. Ilia Topuria vacated opening the way for Alexander Volkanovski to try to reclaim the 145-pound title championship, in which he defended 5 times. And he goes up against his streaking Diego Lopes, minus 145 for the former champion, plus 125 for the first-time title challenger. Now, start off on the Alexander Volkanovski side, who had not lost a fight in 22 fights spanning 10 years until he eventually ran into Islam Makhachev in his bid to become a champ by challenging the light heavyweight champion. Now, that was a very close fight in February of 2023. Argument could be made on either side. I ultimately think the right person won, but it was a very close fight. Volkanovski then went back down to 145 pounds and remind guys why he was the kingpin of 145 pounds, and he ended up knocking out Yair Rodriguez after wearing him down. And then he went back up to lightweight on very short notice to take on Islam Makhachev, and he got knocked out that night, unfortunately. And that was followed up by him coming back way too quickly after that knockout and trying to defend the featherweight title again against Ilia Topuria, who he was able to win the first round against on all 3 judges' scorecards, but ultimately he made one minor lapse in judgment, zigged when he should have zagged, and he ultimately ate a big shot from Topuria that put him out clean. Now, a lot of people are writing off Volkanovski, 36 years old, coming off back-to-back knockout losses. Now he's minus 145 against a guy like Diego Lopes. Now, Volkanovski is a guy that was chalk in most of his matchups when he's not fighting a guy like Makhachev or Ilia Topuria. But people are questioning his ability to take a clean shot now. Now, Ilia Topuria is a guy that knocked out Max Holloway, a guy that unanimously can be agreed upon had probably one of the greatest chins in the history of the UFC. But again, another guy that zigged when he should have zagged, and he ate the cleanest shot from Ilia Topuria and got put out. Can Diego Lopes produce that type of power? Let's talk about him real quick here. So I want to quickly give people a macro view of Diego Lopes. They always just micro view his last performances or last few performances, seeing the 3-fight finishing streak that he was on. But a macro view of him here. He got a Contender Series opportunity back in 2021 where he got absolutely beat down by Joanderson Brito, who just got 30-26 by Pat Sabatini this past weekend in the co-main event. He then lost to a regional journeyman in his next fight for Fury FC. His next 2 wins came against guys with a combined record of 20-18, and then he accepted a short notice replacement spot to fight in the UFC against Movsar Evloev, a fight that he lost, but put up a valiant effort, throwing up submissions and making it closer than a lot of people were making it seem. Since then, he's won 5 straight matchups, finishing those first 3 fights, quickly submitting Gavin Tucker, knocking out Pat Sabatini, and then knocking out Sodiq Yusuff. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he has improved since that loss against Joanderson Brito in 2021, but there are still some holes in his game that we saw in the Dan Ige fight that could, see him get exposed. Like, we know his cardio is a little bit of a question mark. Dan Ige nearly got him out of there at the ending of that 3rd round. Brian Ortega had a little bit of success against him there too, but that was a perfect stylistic matchup for Diego Lopes to have good enough jiu-jitsu to deal with that side of Ortega's game, and then obviously be the superior striker. Sure, he's getting better. And sure, Volkanovski, momentum not really on his side. But stylistically speaking, this is a very winnable fight for Volkanovski. If his durability holds up, he was having great, solid success against Topuria early in that fight, sticking to a game plan, a lot of lateral movement, a lot of kicking, good jab, bloodied the nose of Ilia Topuria in the 2nd round with that constant jab, good 1-2s, just minding his P's and Q's with his striking defense is going to be very important for him here. And even then, even if Diego Lopes lands a big shot, does he have the type of power that Topuria can generate to try to knock Volkanovski out? Or can he time a perfect head kick the way Islam Makhachev did to knock out Volkanovski? And again, that was a very underprepared Volkanovski, and which we know if your conditioning is not really up to par, it will be easier to get knocked out. You bet your ass that Volkanovski has taken the necessary time off from being a full year away from action and getting his body back into fight shape to try to get and reclaim the title that he had before. And I think this is a very winnable fight for him. Again, this is one that I will be a little bit cautious. I will be a little bit cautious of that possible decline of Volkanovski. But if his durability holds up, he is the far superior fighter to Diego Lopes. This is a matchup that I see Volkanovski can outwork Lopes, maybe finish him in the 4th or 5th round. But my final prediction for this fight will be Volkanovski by decision, landing more damage. And I could also see him looking to utilize a grappling approach, keeping Lopes on his back. And we already know Volkanovski has great submission defense, and he can just work through Lopez's guard and beat him down the way that Joanderson Brito beat down Diego Lopes with a grapple-heavy approach. And maybe what Volkanovski was able to do against a guy like Yair Rodriguez as well, beating them down and then finishing them with some ground and pound. It's possible. My official prediction will be decision for Volkanovski. I might sprinkle that round 4, round 5 prop for Volkanovski if it's juicy enough. But I think we see the great Alexander Volkanovski reclaim that featherweight title. How long he holds on to it for this time around, I don't know. But this is a very winnable fight for him, and I would be kicking myself for passing up on this spot, especially at minus 145 if he ends up getting the win. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC 314. Appreciate the love. As you guys can tell, I've listened to the comments. I've listened to the reception. You guys enjoyed when I went into the backgrounds of each fighter and then matched them up and gave my prediction. Thus, we're back to the regular format of the MMA Lawcast and giving you guys a little bit more to listen to and a little bit more background so you guys know exactly where my head's at for all these predictions. I'll be back tomorrow for the top 3 lock of the night candidates, although I might be changing that to the dog of the night candidates for this week because I don't think I'm going to have a lock of the night play for this card. So I will have a dog of the night play, so I'll probably do that. And then I'll be back for the rest of the segments that you guys already know. Wednesday, I'll be back for the PFL breakdowns. Thursday, LFA breakdowns. Full week of content coming your way. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the support. Drop a comment. Drop a like. Whatever, drop a subscribe if you haven't already. Got a lot of new subscribers recently, closing in on 8,600 subscribers now as well. I would love to hit 10,000 by the end of the year. That's a bit of a stretch, but at the rate we're going, it's possible. So hit that subscribe if you haven't already, because we've been getting a lot of views on these videos. Appreciate the love, appreciate the support. I'm rambling now. I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.